Good, thank you very much. I will try to bridge those two talks we will have. One by Professor Stanchik and one by Daniel Schwartz here. Who will, of course, direct it towards the fundamental, I said correctly, topics of ethics and, of course, philosophy, based on what, let's say, the philosophical fundamentals of free market and classical liberalism are. So I'll start with dystopian, real world-like assumption or hypothesis or image of what our fears, and our fears are perfectly human and understandable, may make us do and feel and most importantly act. We spoke about well, China was mentioned a couple of times. So suppose a world, and quite likely it will happen, where the Chinese, despite their absolutely incredible and for more than 3 decades now rate of growth of GDP, that is real, actual improvement of their level of wealth, this country, for specific reasons, basically the policy of a single child, this country's population will become old, that is no longer capable of creating value and wealth. Now, creating value for those who are not really economists is a very, very fancy word. In the business world, you will hear it all the time. We have to create value. You have to create value. There are a lot of things to say, both from a business or economic point of view, and of course from a philosophical point of view. But we don't have time here to discuss this. However, if all those people they will become old, and they will become old before they become rich, what those people would rationally do? Now, ask yourself, what would you do if you become old? And that will happen, despite your best efforts. If you become old and you are not wealthy enough, or there is absolutely no framework or infrastructure which would support your needs when you can no longer provide and basically maintain a decent level of quality of life. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people here. So my guess is that those people would just turn west and go across Asia, and they'll come to Europe. Now, this is precisely what is the root of the fear we are trying to instill within Europe, this fear of the foreigner, of the different, of that one who comes here in order to profit from what we have created. Now, Professor Stanchik did insist, and it will never be enough to insist on this thing. Human capital is, so to speak, the only capital we may talk about. Now, I know there are a lot of economics students here. You will disagree because of what you have been told by colleagues. We have capital and labor, and this is your production function. Lovely. Very, very lovely. It works in theory. However, when it comes to practice, it's a slightly different story. Now, if I may suggest a book, not only to economics students, but also to political science students, and I think there are many of them here, and in the younger audience, if there is any students from high schools, do read it. It exists both in Bulgarian. It has been translated. The translation is good enough. It exists in English. Of course, you can buy it online, definitely. It is a book by P.J. O'Rourke, and it's called Eat the Rich. So it has a quite rock and roll title there, Eat the Rich. For those who don't know, there was back then in time a rock and roll band with a similar song. But if you do read the book, you will see a very funny comparison. And the book is really, it is funny, to be honest. a very interesting comparison of different institutional sets, and this is where I'm heading to, institutions. Institutional sets across countries. The examples are Cuba, of course, you'll see why, of course, Russia, I think Tanzania, Sweden, Hong Kong, before it has been handed back to the Chinese, and New York, Wall Street. So the question P.G. O'Rourke asks is, how come you can have countries like Russia, there are perhaps many Russians among the audience. Russia is definitely the richest country in terms of resources and natural treasures, etc. And how come this country, people of this country, remain poor despite all those treasures they literally live on? Of course, it is a matter of institutions. And the institutions we are building up, we have created, we're proud, very, very proud of having achieved such a tremendous development because of those institutions. Adam Smith was mentioned, of course. Our Western liberal world benefits from are institutions based on precisely the possibility of people to achieve freely and to express freely their own capacities in a framework where property rights would be respected. Why institutions are so important, and why, as the central question here, do companies, do business ventures have the right to hire foreign workers, is the answer is so obvious. But despite the fact that the answer is obvious, justifying the answer is not easy. Institutions are those rules which will make our behavior predictable. And you'll see how this connects to what Professor Schwarz will be talking about, is that this contributes to answering the central question of our living together. It comes from Aristotle, so it has been a long, long, long time we have been trying to answer this question. How do we manage to live peacefully and harmoniously together? Those are two different things. You can live peacefully with each other, and still it will not be a harmonious way of living together. You can live harmoniously, and the perfect example would be war, and this, of course, will be not peaceful. So, if we are to provide any reason not to hire a foreigner, and very often it is quite difficult to justify. Just think of what the initial example here was with the football team. Now, footballers, despite the fact that there are many football fans here perhaps, footballers' contribution to wealth and development and progress, no, nothing like zero virtually. But footballers were, sports people were the first ones to be granted this incredible possibility to be virtually globally mobile, which is not the case for you. And I don't point at you because you may not be from an EU member state, so this fortress Europe, so to speak, beneficiaries. Despite all the efforts you do people provide, we currently are waging war against the very institutions which provided, through the freedom, liberty, the freedom to move around, the freedom to create wealth, that is to have a properly economic activity. We're waging war at those institutions for reasons which are, as Rasen Stančić pointed out, basically barriers to entry on the market. We're waging, because we cannot say we're waging war on the free market, as the free market generates a lot of wealth. It's a very hidden war against the institutions which would support the free market. And the easiest way to wage this war is to point out the differences. You're Armenian, you're from Georgia, or you're Chinese. You don't belong to our community, and we fall back into a tribal world, which I'm afraid becomes extremely powerful because it creates layers in our perceptions of what society shall be. We fall back in a tribal world where all faults are not with us, but with the different people, with the differences we may no longer accept because they challenge our own understanding of how great and good and correct we are. A very quick reminder for economic students, and I'll let the floor, I think I have enough time, is Daniel Bernoulli, if you've heard the name, is an Italian mathematician who, 3 centuries or something, approximately three and a half centuries ago, came up with the idea of basically what became marginal utility. The idea that utility decreases with the increase in quantity of given good we possess. And surprisingly, he didn't come with this idea. He didn't come up with this idea in a very fertile environment like Italy, northern Italy, or France, or back then in time, before it became a welfare state, or in London. He came up with this idea in Russia, where a number of scientists from Europe were invited in order to contribute to scientific development in the Russian state, in the Russian country, so for the Russian people. The acknowledgement of the value of human resource and human capital has been present for a very, very long time. And a student of mine has tried to challenge me, and it is challenging, with the question if the state shall hire foreigners and even for sensitive positions. And the answer, of course, to this question will be yes. We have to make up our mind to the fact that nationality is not a criteria when it comes to the best possible use of human resources, which is the scarcest resource we have. Thank you.